Hello and welcome to the 2016 by-election for Finance and Commercial Services Executive Officer. Joining us today, we've got a finance commercial candidate, Hersh Patel. Hersh, you've got 30 seconds to introduce yourself and give a brief outline to your manifesto.
Okay, so as Matt said, my name's Hersh, and the reason that I'm running is because I've had the best 2 years of my life at Loughborough, and then following that, getting involved with Social Sec at Towers then sort of was an eye-opener to getting involved, what that can mean for the rest of the students at the uni, and doing that on a bigger scale leads me to apply to this position. So going into my manifesto, one of the main central themes is the Loughborough app, and the reason that that's one of the main themes is because I think information that we give to the students has to be clear, consistent, and it will basically be a point of engaging with students. So that's one of the main things. And for finance and commercial services, I do see relaying that information as one of the key points. I'm sure we'll get into that in my manifesto in a second, but that's the reason why I'm running. And I'm sure once you hear my manifesto, you'll realise what I've got to give to this role.
Okay, Hersh, so as you mentioned, you plan to have an app in your manifesto, so we'll start on that point. So here is your first question. So an app is surely a communication strategy, and is this not the role of the Union Affairs Executive Officer? In continuation of this, we've had a brand new website just made. How do you plan to integrate this system with the new website? And if this Yik Yak idea was a solution, how would you come up with the set of likely solutions that could be upvoted or downvoted?
Okay, so that's quite a big question, Matt. So firstly, to go for why it's not the union for Union Affairs, well, as I sort of touched on earlier, with finance and commercial services, that is something that students see as one of the sort of main things that they are actively sort of deciding. So things that where we're saying like drinks prices or what's on in the union, that sort of thing. I feel that those things are within the commercial services boundaries. So entertainment, what we working closely with the entertainment team, that for me comes under commercial services. And what you mentioned about the app and media, how would they sort of correspond together? Well, I feel as if a lot of the content will be shared across media and the app, but in terms of the app being so much more accessible in people's fingertips, sort of every sort of second, having reminders of this event tonight, this event tomorrow night, location, timings, admission processes, everything like that, I think needs to be on a phone as opposed to on a website. I read even a study which said like it was over 57% or something prefer apps than they do websites, and that's across all boards, not just sort of this student union situation. And finally, the third point you said about the Yik Yak feature, how would I get the information for what I would put forward to students to upvote would be the similar things than what we're doing now, just that the choices part of it would be more accessible. So what we do now is things like surveys, talking to people, just knowing what the students around us think at HSF meetings, DSF meetings, all those things would still be involved, but then we as a sort of team, get down the most 3 realistic points, most feasible points, and then offer them forward. I think that is a lot better way to do it from top down rather than say, what are your criticisms, and then try and pinpoint every single one. I think the Yik Yak feature would be a far more realistic way of saying, this is feasible, what do you guys want?
Okay, thanks, Hersh. So now we're going to move over to your second question. One of your points is that facilities not facilitating are not facilities at all.
Yeah.
So the question that we've got for you, when you said, additionally, these union rooms will be injected with life and then, of course, be available to book for socials. The union facilities are pretty much in full use all the time, and all the rooms are already available to book at any point at any time for anyone that will want to use them. So what do you propose to change?
Sure. So the way I see that sort of system working is that when I wanted to book, for example, a sports hall, a social sag, it was very easy for me to go onto the website, click the timings, see the map of when it's being used, when it isn't, and book it in. So I think something similar to that, but with features of something what I've been calling add-ons, which would be what sort of equipment you want, whether you need staff, chairs, mics, speakers, all those sort of things that we think are feasible for that room, all there in a list, and you just check which box want, and that would then enable to generate a sort of priced quota for that amount of time, that day, whatever it might be. Following that, I think it would be a great idea for the union as a whole to make some purchases that could go along with those rooms. So maybe purchase some beer pong tables for some pre-drinks, or some sort of replace those unions as common room spaces, because I know that was a huge problem whilst for a lot of department socials and hall socials. So including those sort of things like beer pong tables, tennis tables, table tennis tables, all that bean bags, and including those into the booking system, then makes it a sort of, as I said, injects it with life. So it's not just a room, a box. It's more an experience that we're offering, as opposed to what I feel it is more towards now. Does that answer your question, Matt?
Yeah, it does, and it kind of goes on to the next part of the question as well. So obviously you've talked about how you're going to book in things and how you're going to make things a bit more lively. The union is at maximum capacity all the time, and that's hence the need for a new building. So what would be your thoughts towards a new building, and what would you like to see in there, and why?
Okay, so I did think for a new building that a good idea would be a room that's really interactive. So maybe have a roster of people who are there, voluntary, sort of talking about different things that people can get involved with in uni. Because if you go into our union at the moment, I feel as if downstairs is a sort of like a chill area, and then upstairs is more like the office area. But we don't have a sort of area at the moment which is where people can just go and find out things at any time in the day about the uni, what they can do, talk to people, like in a more sense of giving people information, but when they choose to be given it, as opposed to throwing information at people. So just to sort of recap that point, a room where we have some people from time to time volunteering to talk to people about what they can get involved with, and also just sort of like, again, just utilising the building for sort of my previous idea of like a booking areas for these pre-drinks or socials or whatever it might be, just utilising all the space we have as a union to our students.
Okay, so your next question is based around the very opening of your manifesto when you say, let's stick to the facts. So, the question is, bite-sized chunks of the finances. How do you plan to present this information that is easily accessible to all students, not just those with a financial background? And furthermore, what are you aiming to achieve from showing these bite-sized chunks?
Okay, so the reason I say about bite-sized chunks of information is because for myself and others that I've spoken to, it's become clear that if we see, it's just the day and age that we live in, really, not even just in this situation, in all other fields as well, that if we see some information that's sentences or like massive bits of writing, we're far less likely to firstly want to read it, secondly understand it. So by going into sort of bite-sized chunks of information, which may not be fully explaining what it is we wish to relay, but it would be the headline points, something that will engage people. So if we look at the student population of Loughborough, I wouldn't say that the entire population wants to always see this information. However, if we give it as sort of bite-sized chunks, those who wish to see the full information then have a way of saying, oh, well, I enjoyed reading that small bit there, that engaged me, let me go on and read something that's a bit more a bit more fully explained. And so that's what I meant by the bite-sized information. And then to answer the second part of your question, how would I do that? So things like making a massive list of areas where we can catch people's attention with just a small bit of information. So a couple of ideas that I thought of were monitor screens across campus, having like these sort of screensavers or some sort of advert that comes on when you log in saying just a couple of sentences about that might just sort of give someone a bit of engagement and say, oh, that looks interesting. I've learned something about, firstly, what finance and commercial services are up to, and secondly, I kind of want to look into that a bit more. So that's sort of where I'm going with this point, and then sort of just small chunks of news bulletin styles rather than, I just want to stay away from reports and tables and sheets, balance sheets, more towards, and again, tying in with the app, something that's a lot more easy to read, engages people, and is just really straightforward and to the point.
Okay, thank you. So now we're going to go on to the questions which both candidates will have answered. So,
Sure.
one particular part of your job that's rather important is that you will become in charge of the discipline policy. Can you provide an example of how you have to act independently and confidentially of your peers?
Okay, so for an example would be if somebody were to come into a disciplinary with the union, then, and you knew who they were, and they were a friend or something like that, then I know that there is already some regulation in place for what can and cannot be done, whether there needs to be a second person there. But in terms of confidentiality, it's important that you just take full responsibility of your role, as opposed to any relationship or friendship you might have coming across the disciplinary policy with somebody else, and that sort of thing. Not sort of letting a friendship or a relationship with somebody sort of come in the way of that disciplinary policy, which would essentially be just going by the rules of the uni, really, in terms of confidentiality.
Okay, so moreover to the question, how are you going to ensure that disciplines do not take up a large period of your term in office for the year?
Okay, sure. So I think from disciplinaries, we can sort of look at all of what we've seen in the past, and so that sort of data, in a sense, we can see what people have been getting disciplinaries for, and when they occur, what time of year. We have all this data available to us by looking at when all of these sanctions were given. And so with that information, then, we can sort of tailor our disciplinary policy to ensure that less people are actually having to get disciplined. So, for example, say we have sanctions for violence in the union, for example. We then can say we've had this many across the year. It seems to be on Wednesdays every year, and particularly in the summertime. So then by using that data, we can then say, okay, increase security on that day, have bouncers more alert to the fact that occurs, and so disciplinaries will then decrease. And that's just one example, but I think what's really important is using data, what we've got from disciplinaries, and sort of engaging people in campaigns, or just from internally ensuring that everyone's aware of what to look out for.
Okay, so obviously you've just said that it's more based around how to prevent people being reckless and such, but obviously people will still be removed from the union and people will still be issued with bans. How do you prevent the amount of time it takes to run a disciplinary take up your time in office?
Well, I don't know the full ins and outs of how it works for me personally to be delegating that sort of role and getting help with it at all. But in that sense, I think it would be a good idea to, instead of sort of putting hours and hours of time into that, spend meetings, etc., I think sort of minimise how many hours are spent with the individual. So if there's a very straightforward sort of procedure for certain disciplinaries, then have that set as the procedure. So not overlooking things like if you've got to have a meeting with somebody, then not sort of go really by the book and not sort of prolong the disciplinary process. Right.
Okay. So we're going to move on to the second question of the three that both you and Ben have answered. So this is, how do you plan to show the university and students that the extra grant money received from the university is being spent accordingly? And this digit is roughly over £100,000.
How do you
plan to show the university and students that the extra grant money being received from the university is being spent accordingly?
Okay, so I think that again is to do with just ensuring that we're in touch with the thoughts and feelings of the students. So if we're getting a grant from the uni for finance and commercial services, then it would only be fair to ensure that we're taking the point of view of the majority of those who the money is being spent on into account. So for example, with bite-sized chunks of information and making sure that we're transparent with it, actually say where that money's going rather than saying it's going into the pot and then these are our spending habits. Instead, have that money set aside and say exactly where that money is going, a timeline of it, and the full spending regime sort of transparent for the students.
Okay, so now it's your final question. So we already have fantastic hardware in place that run our promotional data material, and the software is always improving. How can we make students more valued at LSU and increase their expenditure whilst not exploiting them?
Increase their expenditure whilst not exploiting them?
Yes.
Do you mind just repeating that question for me again?
Okay. So we already have fantastic hardware in place that run our promotional data material, and the software is always improving. What specific bits of data are you wanting to use over the year, and how can we make students more valued at LSU and increase their expenditure whilst not exploiting them?
Okay, sure. So things like understanding which sort of promotional materials actually benefit our students. So, for example, if we look at the loyalty points, that is directly something that we're trying to say, okay, we're trying to help you out by looking at your spending habits and going back to them and saying, we know you enjoy this purchase or this purchase. How can we better that experience or that good for you? So, for example, with the loyalty points, it should be the loyalty points are very clearly tailored and complement the individual. So one of the things I was mentioning in my manifesto was that if we have a clear indication of what we need to promote when in the year, then it becomes a lot easier for us to be in touch with the students. So that might include, one of the things I said was if there's something that we need to promote, an idea would be like ice cream during an event in the summer that's near the union. We know that we can promote that more easily because obviously data shows that the ice creams are going up in how many are sold around that time. So just small things like that across the board, or even in drinks prices in the union, just across the board, looking at data and saying, how can we promote what we already know about the students to ensure that they're getting a better experience or cheaper goods all in all.
Okay, thank you, Hersh. So that's the end of the Q&A, and so now you've got 15 to 30 seconds just to explain why people should vote for you.
Okay, so I think people should vote for me because I've got a clearly thought out manifesto which has a really central theme, which is to ensure that students are engaging with my section, and that would be through some sort of I don't think that it's a question of whether the app needs to happen at all. I think it's a question of when, that in the next few years it's going to happen. That do we want to be one of the leading student unions who starts it off and ensure that we're in touch with our students and are transparent and everyone knows exactly where finances are being spent and what their commercial services are available to them at the click of a button, and furthering that, what they can do at any point at the union. And the reason I think I'll be the best person to put this manifesto into place is because I'm a people's person who's extremely motivated, and I'm in touch with the people. I understand how people think and feel, and I've really enjoyed my time at Loughborough so far, and I think that is something that is most important. If I've enjoyed my time, I can help other people enjoy their time too.
Okay, so there you have it. That's your Finance and Commercial Services Executive Officer candidate, Hersh Patel. Voting opens on Thursday at 9 a.m. and closes on Friday at 4 p.m. Make sure to vote, and we wish both candidates the best of luck.